Hey everybody, it's Dommy and Jamie back with a Hometown History Extra, and we have Mayor Michael Helfrich here, and he's the former Riverkeeper, so he might be our person to ask all these questions. Yeah, our expert.
You know, first I was the president of the Codorus Creek Improvement Partnership.
Really? What year was that?
That was 2002 to 2005.
Okay.
And then I became the Lower Susquehanna Riverkeeper after that.
Okay.
So it all started right here.
So I was looking at your bio, and you clearly are into activism and environmentalism. So what was that switch then for you that you were like, I want to be the mayor now?
Well, my friend Genevieve Ray, who actually started, I don't know if she was a founder of Save Our Codorus Creek back in the 1970s. She was the president of city council, and she was stepping down, so she, and I had been helping them with some stuff. And she said, hey, I think you should be a council person. And I did it. And then once I was a council person, as it goes in leadership, you kind of, or even in the public, if you think you can do a job better, you either got to shut up or do it. And I'm not very good at shutting up. So that's what I did. I ran for mayor, and now I'm mayor.
And you've been mayor for how long?
7 years.
7 years. That's very cool. Very cool. So one of our first questions is the beautification project. So it asks about the park-to-park idea of going from Vance Park the whole way down to the Richland Avenue Foundry Park between Market and Philly. Can you tell us, how will this benefit the people living in this area?
Well, before I do that, I hate to be that guy, but I am. I don't know where you got your numbers for the park. I had to check in with Kevin Schreiber because I knew your numbers weren't right.
Which numbers? The cost or
the cost, the dates, any of it. So when it was first planned out, it was a $70 million project. Okay, that's for all of the phases, and that was 2019-ish. So you know what has happened since then, huge inflation. And then we also found out that we have to replace the Market Street Bridge for anything downstream of the Market Street Bridge to be actually implemented. That's an $8 to $9 million project. So we're talking about 70 million, I call it a $100 million project. And you're starting in 2025 and ending in 2026 is phase 1, which goes from Grantley down to around College, or down around to College Avenue.
So not this area right here?
Not this area. There are no plans right now to do this. There's nothing. They raised $26.5 million of the original $70 million. But as I said, costs have gone up since that time, and we have to replace the Market Street Bridge. So anything below the Market Street Bridge is kind of off the plan until we can do that. And then because of issues with the Market Street Bridge, they chose to start on the upper part of the waterway instead of doing the downtown part. So
it won't really impact right here, initially at least?
No, there are no current plans. There's no current implementation ready for anything down here. The plans for up there are with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they're waiting for approval of that. But that will be pathways. We're working on a western and northern trail that almost parallels the rail trail.
Okay.
But it would connect the parks and the neighborhoods here in some of our lower income neighborhoods to then have access to the creek and also better access to the rail trail so that they can have access to almost the entire county.
Yep. The estimates we used were from the grant application and then someone who works in the Economic Alliance. But clearly what is documented in public is very different from the information you have. So thank you for the most up-to-date knowledge. What about then those neighborhoods? Like, why is that important, that transportation route to the neighborhoods to the creek?
Well, people need to, for proper, growth in general, you need to learn about other things. And one thing that happens in York and in many cities is people get locked into their blocks or their little areas, their little geographic areas, and then they use that as reasons to not like other people from different geographic regions. And that's how you get like gang violence and stuff like that. And it's not recent. It goes back to the bullfroggers and the swampers and the Gerarders and all the, it goes back, way back into the 1900s, and I'm sure before that. Gangs of New York in the 1850s, So this isn't a new phenomenon, but by expanding the horizon of people, you find that those things kind of diminish when they see that there is a bigger, brighter, beautiful world out there. So the hope is to connect everybody to the assets. The rail trail is the #1 recreational asset in York County.
Based off of what? Usage?
Yes.
Usage.
Yes. I was going to say based off of what I've been told. But yes, I would say that it's the number of people using that versus any other individual park in the county. And of course, we have people coming in from all over the place to utilize the rail trail.
It is beautiful.
A lot more so than some of our other beautiful parks. So having that, and then the Codorus Creek, which please don't get confused, because most of that map that you saw is beautiful, beautiful waterways on the South Branch and the East Branch. Our drinking water comes from the Codorus Creek, as it has for a long time. So just following the West Branch, which, as I pointed out earlier, 30% of the West Branch is pollution from one facility. So that there's so much beauty, particularly along the rail trail, where the Codorus is. So those two amenities combined are just amazing, and every person in York County should have access, and that's part of the reason why doing a parallel trail. I'm working on another trail right now to connect with the Broad Street Greenway, which is a trail in the city. I want to connect the Broad Street Greenway to the rail trail, connect this trail to the rail trail, and then we have the King Street bike corridor, and that should hopefully give everybody in the city access to these mind-expanding amenities that we have here.
We talked about that when we did our Penn Park. We talked about the idea of the rail trail going back in and dipping into Penn Park, so then that can be accessed more. Yeah.
I like that.
So what happens, so you're not running for mayor again.
I'm not.
How involved are you going to be with the river? Because, the creek, the creek and the river were instrumental in you getting involved,
Yeah.
So...
We'll see. That's my answer. My answer is we'll see. I have been an activist and then an elected official activist for 23 years now, and I think that's a pretty good chunk of my life. But I'm not going to walk away from things that I know are important.
Okay.
So yeah, I do plan to have some involvement, but I don't know at what level.
Okay. Well, why the water then?
The water started, I guess, I'm a nature-loving Boy Scout hippie, and I went to the what used to be called River Walk. Now it's York Fest, and I looked at all these people celebrating beauty, and I looked at it next to a polluted, nasty creek. And I'm like, shouldn't we be focused? This is nice, but shouldn't we be focused on this? I mean, this is where we live. So in my 20s activism kind of thing, I started dressing up in a toxic waste suit and walking up and down during Riverfest with signs that said, save God's art, clean the creek. P.H. Gladfelder stinks for downtown business. Things like that. That was how I got started, by just recognizing. Then I threw the first Codorus Fest in 1998 at the boat basin, because I saw this beautiful boat basin and really hardly anybody using it for anything. So again, just trying to draw more attention to this asset. In some communities, a waterway is like the #1 asset, and in ours, if you go down the creek, there are very few buildings. Stevens Avenue, little Stevens Avenue across the Beaver Street Bridge, is the only place where houses are actually facing the creek. Imagine that. In other cities, everything wants to face the waterway, that increases the value. So yeah, I saw that. And again, not only from my nature boy kind of persona, but also being a young kind of I don't know that I saw myself becoming an elected official, but I definitely saw myself involved in the changing of the community. You know, so those two things really came together with the Codorus Creek. If we could change the Codorus Creek, we could change the economics of the city, we could improve the lives for the majority of the, I don't know about majority, a lot of the lower income people, the impoverished people in our city are very close to the creek. So that psychology messes with you. You're already poor on money, but now you're poor on neighborhood too. You're poor on the environment. And also, contrary to what I've heard, I've never heard of a time where fish were not living in the creek downtown. Because even when you go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, kids were always fishing and even swimming in the Inky Stinky Codorus Creek.
Well, that's what Dr. Vanellencourt found, right? He found the fish.
What's
that's what Dr. Vanellencourt was trying to do.
So I heard a couple times, though, that there were times when there were no fish. I've never found in history, in my research, a time where there weren't fish in the creek. I think the species of fish, you know, and the macroinvertebrates that you talked about earlier, those are the things that determine the health. So I do want to point out that I think your grandfather and the EPA were right at the same time. It's just that they were talking from different angles. You know, your grandfather was saying, hey, look, we shouldn't ignore this because there are fish in here, and it does need improved, but it's supporting fish. You know, and the EPA is saying, yeah, it's supporting fish, but it's horrible. And, you know, you can have both at the same time. I don't know if you've ever heard of these black rivers or black swamps that are basically highly tannic natural waterways. And the majority of what is the visual perception and even some of the smell are the tannins that come from the trees. So they make it inky. They make it dark. They make it a little stinky. But they're also, what Gladfelder would argue, is that the same conditions exist in natural places. They're just
exacerbating it.
Yeah. So I never went along with that. But the one thing I will say is that, which Gladfelder was it? In around 2002, I met with the president of Gladfelder at that time, and they had decided to go back from a non-family CEO to a family CEO. Okay. And I had the conversation with him, and he said, you know, Michael, you're pointing out, we really appreciate that you're pointing out all these other sources of pollution, because you're pointing out the wastewater treatment plants, which do put our poop in the water. They treat it first, but essentially, that's where our stuff goes. It's got to go somewhere. I told him, I said, I recognize that Gladfelder, pound for pound, milliliter for milliliter, is only 15% of the pollution in Codorus Creek. But you are 99% of the psychological pollution. You're 99 because maybe those tannins aren't that horrible and the fish can live in those tannins, but when people see it, they think it's an open sewer. And so the next person thinks it's an open sewer, and the next one, and everybody just treats it that way.
Well, that's actually a question we had to ask you about if you would.
Sorry, I am rambling.
No,
I told you I don't have a script.
We were just wondering. So after these changes are implemented, do you think it'll be suitable to go in and swim and wade in the creek?
I do it now already, and I'm still here. But I think some of the changes, particularly the increase in the flow of water. One of the big issues is that the Bascule Dam held up the water from below Philadelphia Street the whole way up to the College Avenue Bridge, and it just sat in there stagnant, essentially. You know, if you got a dam here, the top might change, but some of the stuff, you know, the leaves build up. It just gets nasty. You know, so the plan is to, and somebody asked earlier if this is going to change, the depth is going to change. The plan is to fill in some and make a smaller channel that moves a lot faster so that it's more like a stream, and then it'll have banks that can overflow whenever the water is up. That's the idea. Now, to maintain something like that, that's that's going to be interesting
story.
over the next 100 years, how future mayors and hopefully the YCEA is including a maintenance fund and plan for the long-term care of this project. Because, you know, when I looked at the Olmsted plan, I've always looked at that and said, you know, what a shame. But today I looked at it and said, oh yeah, that would have been all gone in 1933. So you could have put all that money in and it would have been all gone completely. Every penny that they would have invested.
I don't think that's not an excuse, or that's an excuse to like never invest, right? But I see your point that at that time.
I think that you have to invest with the knowledge that nature is going to impact what you do. And so, you know, I've been a strong advocate. There were times when they were talking about putting trails down near the creek. I do not advocate for putting trails down near the creek, because if you've ever been to the boat basin or stopped at the boat basin 15 minutes before coming here like I did, you will see that the bottom of the boat basin is covered in mud. And if we put these trails all down near the creek, guess what? Every time your little graph shot up there, that's mud being deposited in this, and somebody's got to clean it up, and it's against the law, it's against environmental laws to shovel it back in the creek.
Really?
Yeah. Just because something came from the creek doesn't mean you're allowed to put it back in the creek.
Where do you put it?
So, there you go. You put it in a landfill, you use it as fill, you gotta have it tested if you want to use it as clean fill, you know, so there are a lot of details. You know, it's very easy to put a rainbow over the creek and say, hey, these are the picture, you know, and pay $100,000 or $200,000 for some artists to make really nice renderings. It's a whole different thing to have a plan of maintenance and actually schedule and predict what the impairments are going to be to your plan.
Well, you're thinking 50, 100 years from now, and it's very difficult to determine the weather. We have an audience that had questions before, and so we have someone up here who's got, I mean, what, 20 plus years of experience of working on the creek, more than that, almost 30 years. Did you have any questions for the mayor?
My question is actually just, I'm looking for a resource. Where would I find a map that details all the plans so far for the Greenway?
Oh, I think YCEA has a site.
On the website.
Yeah,
Right.
so York County Economic Alliance, if you would Google YCEA and Codorus Plan, I'm sure it'll get you there.
That's where we got the majority of our information.
Codorus Greenway.
Codorus Greenway. I remember seeing a large, beautiful illustration of one area of it.
That's in there.
It's there. Okay, great.
And I do want to, I want to slightly correct another thing. Under the Brenner administration, Genevieve Ray went through a whole process of recapture the riverfront. That was in about 2003. So while YCEA undertook this under Mayor Bracey, that's not the history of it. So the history of it is that we've been working, whether it's Save Our Codorus Creek, which Kelly was a part of back in the 1970s, and Genevieve was a part of, or my work starting in 2001, Genevieve coming back and doing work on Recapture the Riverfront. I mean, you can go the whole way back. In the 1920s, Gladfelder shut down for a period of time, and people got to see what it looked like, and then there was a lot of pushback against Gladfelder reopening.
Was that 1920s? You said?
Yeah, in the 1920s, and then in 1880 there was an injunction filed with the sheriff to try and force Gladfelder to shut down because we had our water tested, and at that time York Water Company had grown so much that they were starting to extract from the Codorus Creek, as opposed to Bummy's Woods, where it used to all be spring fed. So then they said, oh no, this is too polluted. You can't use that water for drinking water. And there's one article that says about this injunction, but then nothing ever heard from again. They didn't do anything. What happened was York Water Company changed to Brillhart Station, which is upstream of the effluent of the West Branch. So now our water was coming from upstream of the highly polluted impacts of Gladfelder. So that's how you ended up with Brillhart Station and Reservoir, Reservoir Hill, all that stuff.
Okay, I did not know that. I'm happy you told us that, because we're going to be taking this and putting it on our website for it to live on Witnessing York. We want to make sure we get it right. So if you have any other resources, we'd love to add it to it. Yeah. What other questions do you have?
How many of these phases are fully funded? And secondly, how confident are you that there's going to be continuity to get this whole thing completed?
I have not been part of the process, so I am not going to respond to that. If I was in the weeds and talking to the U.S. senators, and so Kevin Schreiber just sent me a text. I asked him, when I saw those numbers, I'm texting Kevin. I'm like, Kevin, what? This is a lot better than I thought. And no, he texted back, it would be 70 million, but if we could get the 50, and we got 26.5 million. If we could get to 55, he believes that the rest of the gap could be covered. Now, that gets you to 70, which was the number in 2019 or 2020 prior, back to this whole inflation thing. And then that doesn't pay to get the bridge fixed, which we need to do too.
But that's just phase one.
Phase one is fully funded. And phase one is from Grant Lake down to College Avenue.
Okay. You're referring then, you're working on funding for all the phases. Is that what you're just talking about?
That is what they are working on. This is not a city project.
Okay.
So this is the York County Economic Alliance, and having a governor that really wanted the Codorus to be part of his legacy is why all of this energy. It's Tom Wolf working with York County Economic Alliance to try and do something really, really impactful and special. So
I agree. I mean, I just think if they can make this happen, it would really help the city thrive. Bring in businesses in, restaurants, coffee shops, just people out there along the creek just enjoying it, hiking, biking, all that stuff.
Yep.
It's going to make it so much more attractive to the whole area.
That's what there have been consultants that have been brought in to help York figure out what it can do to increase tourism. And a few people have said, why aren't you a river town? When you look at other places that have colleges, like College Town,
Right.
like you could be a river town and attract people in. I think it's just going to take a lot of time and money.
Well, the other thing you have to understand is that this is a flood control project because people died and millions of dollars in homes and businesses have washed down. What, 14 floods since 1784 that have been recorded, I think? 1784, 88, 1817, 1822. I used to know them all. And, because almost every one of them flooded my house, too. You asked about that earlier. The Cook's house right on the edge of the creek, which is why they dug this creek out. It didn't used to look like this. They dug it out to bedrock and put all the debris up on the side, which is why you have, I guess, what would you call it, a trapezoidal channel? That's why you have this channel that you have, is to save us.
And when did they do that? When did they do the big digging?
It started in 1939, and the final report came out about 1950. So it went on hold during World War II, I believe. So yeah, it wrapped up around 1950, and
Okay.
as you pointed out, that included Indian Rock Dam. Yeah.
Great.
There's been a lot of emphasis put on the industrial pollution. How about agricultural? Is there any concern or percentage figured for agricultural pollution?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers handy, but in the South Branch, while it looks really nice, those streams, many of them are impaired for agricultural pollution. So it is absolutely a combination. Agricultural pollution is a little more subtle. And particularly it's subtle in the waterways, much less subtle in the Chesapeake Bay, where it's likely the #1 source, particularly because we've been working really, really hard on industrial sources. I was honored to be at a press conference this morning with the Secretary of Agriculture. They just passed new regulations on putting fertilizer on your lawn. Because out of all the uses, out of all the nutrients going into our waterways, that is probably the least productive, is probably a nice way to say it. You're doing it for the aesthetics of your own property, but if you're not measuring it, you're putting way too much on. And then that washes in. So, farmers, they're growing our food. They're, our wastewater treatment plants are processing our waste. We want that to happen. And so, yeah, today they just announced some new rules for urban fertilizer usage. So to answer your question, yes, there are many sources. Agriculture absolutely is one of them. They're probably, where you might see more agricultural impact is below the city, between the George Street Bridge, or the bend right after George Street Bridge, the whole way down to the wastewater treatment plant. There is thick algae. It's only about a foot deep out there. And there is thick algae. It's hard to paddle through. And those nutrients cause algae to grow very thickly. And when algae grows very thickly, the macroinvertebrates, the little bugs in the water, can't chew it. And when they can't chew it, it just grows and grows and grows and then dies. And when things die, they suck oxygen out of the water. They pass that down to the Chesapeake Bay, and then it grows again, and it kills the bay, and we get $400 bushel crabs. Yeah.
And I know you see more effort too with no-till farming, also to stop with runoff. And York County has been pioneering a lot of stream restoration as for bank sides to stop the pollution going into Chesapeake. So York County seems to be taking it seriously as far as farming pollutants. Yeah,
Lancaster and York are probably, I believe, Pennsylvania's two #1 sources of pollution to the Chesapeake Bay, specifically from agriculture. And yes, we've been doing...
Did you say just from York and Lancaster?
Yes.
So they'll find a little bit, we're just like dumping it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're the #1 areas of agriculture.
Right, yeah.
So if we have agriculture, and then, we have also deposition along our stream banks from 250 years of agriculture. So what happened was they built these dams, and then water eroded behind the dam, soil eroded behind the dam and built up. And then the dam got either washed out or taken out at some point, and we end up with these 10-foot high creek banks. That's not natural. That's not a natural phenomenon. Those valleys where you see those 10-foot high creek banks used to be wetlands. But our ancestors filled them in because of their agricultural practices, cutting down all the forests and then plowing the fields. And then that put that stuff in there. And then now when we have more severe, faster storms, the energy of the water going down is eroding it. So we're not even just talking about, and this is a kind of a thing, is that considered agricultural pollution or not? Because it's hard to tease out what is coming off of a field versus what is eroding from the bank at the edge of the field.
What eroded 100 years ago.
Yeah. Right. Well, it eroded and then stabilized, and then now it's eroding again.
And I think one of the takeaways from this is that water is something that unites us all, whether we're all going down the ship together or all going to work together, because it does take one person to kind of mess it up. But thank you so much, Mayor, for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
If you guys like to hang around and ask him questions, I'm sure he's got nothing to do the rest of the night, but thank you for being here and appreciate you coming out.
I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.